is ladies. So far ladies, right? Yes. But the subject is people who have graduated from Worcester Academy and gone on to be authors. The author we have with us today is also a professor of music. She's also, with being a professor of music, she is a harpsichordist, keyboard. She started on piano a few years back. She has a background which she exhibited at Worcester Academy, and she's a student from Worcester Academy, in singing, in playing woodwinds, in playing... Did you play viola at one point? Yeah. She was the kind of person who, when she was at Worcester Academy, she was in absolutely every ensemble. At that point, it was Rebecca Schaefer. I just want to say, Naomi Schaefer Riley spoke a few weeks ago, a couple of months ago. I first heard about Rebecca because Naomi was in my piano lessons, and she basically said to me, Mr. Irving, don't worry, my sister will come. She's the real musician. And I said, oh, you're wonderful, you're great. Well, she was right. Her sister is a fantastic musician, and she's a wonderful woman, and she was with us, and she went on to Cornell, she went on to Yale, and she has studied the practical side of music history and also the scholarly side of music history, focusing mostly on 17th century music and the connection between violin and voice at that time, and has written a number of scholarly articles on that subject. She is now teaching at New England Conservatory, and she's going to be moving to New Jersey and teaching at Rutgers University next year. Please welcome Rebecca Cypess.
Thanks, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be back here, and especially to be introduced by Mr. Irving, to whom more than, he's going up the stairs right now so he can't hear me say this, but it's probably to him more than anybody else that I owe my career. So he got me started on all sorts of, oh yes, good, interesting stuff, and actually was the first person who told me what a musicologist was, I think. That's probably right. He's a musicologist, although not everybody at Worcester Academy knows that about him. So yeah, musicology is a strange job. Mostly what we say is that I teach music history, and that I do music history. But what that means specifically also is not always clear to everybody. So the best way that I can explain this to you, first of all, is by, well, I'll start by saying this, that what I do in my job is ask questions about music and try to come up with answers to those questions. And the way that I do that is by excavating history, right? You guys are all in history classes, students who are sitting in the back. The grown-ups always sit in the front, and the students always sit in the back. I've been there. You can move up if you want, but maybe you have a better view of the pictures from there. I don't know. So you in the back are all in history classes. What does that do? It means that you're dealing with primarily materials from the time period you're studying. So if you're studying the medieval era, you're going to be dealing with materials from the medieval era. You're going to be looking at sources from that era. If you're studying the 1950s, you're going to be looking at sources primarily from the 1950s. And then there is what we do when we are college professors, or students in college, which you'll be soon enough if you haven't been already, right? If you haven't been already. And that is, you have to think about what those sources mean and come up with some solutions and synthesize things, put things together, and write about them, right? Everybody, oh, I have to write a paper. It's terrible. But writing actually is one of those things, and I'll say more about this in a few minutes, but writing is one of those things that I think really helps us synthesize and understand what's going on. I have a little thing to say about this. But the other way that I can tell you what I do as a musicologist is actually by showing you an example. So the materials that I'm going to show you today, this is the title page, the front page of a book I'm going to be talking to you about today. So the materials, no, the best way that I can explain to you what it means to be a music historian or a musicologist is by showing you what I do. So this is an example. I think I already said this. Wow, I'm going around in circles. This is an example of Something that I worked on very recently, an article that I published in a scholarly journal, right? Something like what you will read when you get to college. Probably, maybe you guys are already doing this now because everything is so easily accessible online and everything. So something that I just recently worked on is a very strange piece of music composed in the early 17th century. This was composed in 1627. Now, there are periods in music history where things seem to gel, things seem to come together, and we have a great period of kind of productivity, but all basically in the same kind of vein, all basically in the same style, or a lot in the same style. Then there are periods in music history where all the rules get thrown up in the air, and the cards fall where they may, and everybody is just trying new things and experimenting. So that actually is what interests me the most. What happens when the rules start getting really broken? So this period, the early 17th century, is interesting to me because it's a period when all the rules get broken and things start really to change dramatically. So one of the ways that one example of this kind of change is that all of a sudden this instrument called the violin, which had been around in some form for about 100 years at this point, it didn't always have the shape that it has now, or even that it had by 1627. But the violin, all of a sudden, starts getting used in bizarre ways. So in one way that it gets used is to imitate the human voice. And that's, as Don said, that's one of my interests, the way that the violin comes to imitate the human voice. But another way that it gets used is to imitate all sorts of other sounds, noises. In a way, it's used in the piece that I'm going to show you tonight. It's used not in a musical way, but in a distinctly unmusical way. That here we have a piece of music where the composer is actually trying to make sounds from nature, including imitating dogs, cats, and chickens. And also to imitate other musical instruments, so making music and also non-music, right? So imitating other musical instruments. I've given you a little handout, if you have the handout. If not, there may be extras somewhere, I don't know, in the back. So they're imitating all sorts of other musical instruments, from the most low class to kind of the most high, refined, kind of courtly instruments, things that were used in courts of kings and queens and so on. So a huge array of instruments, and it's, the whole piece, this whole piece that I'm going to talk to you about, it comes from this volume. This is the title page. This is what the book actually looks like. It's housed in we have only 2 exemplars, two copies of this book that survive today. They're both housed in libraries in Germany, but of course because of digital technology I can get a beautiful picture like this and bring it to you here in full color. It's like everything is, you're actually sitting right in front of the book, except it's, I don't know, 15, 20 feet high. So the composer that I'm going to talk to you about tonight is Carlo Farina, who was an Italian composer. Now can anybody see what language the title page actually is in? You could either read it in the funny script over there, or you could see my transcription over here. The Anderteil Neuer Part1.m4v, and so on and so on. German, right? Yeah, somebody said German. So he's Italian, but actually he was living in Germany when he published, he actually published all of his music during a very brief stay in Germany. He was working at the court of the Elector of Saxony in the city of Dresden, and you can see down here at the bottom that the book was published in the city of Dresden. So this is a nice title page. We should read a little bit. It's one of these old books generally have very long titles. Right now we think short titles are better, but old books generally have very long titles that take up like an entire page. So what we have here is the second volume. Ander means the other, but it's actually the second volume. So it's Farina's second publication. The second volume of Pédouans and galliards and courants and French songs. These are all different kinds of dances. put next to, or including, ein kurzweiligen Quodlibet, which means a time-passing or entertaining quodlibet, which is a strange word. It means like, it's a piece that is whatever you will, whatever you please. Okay, so it's a quodlibet with various strange inventions, the likes of which have never before been seen in print. And sure enough, actually I'm gonna, Don, could you click to the next slide, please? So this is just a close-up of these three guys hanging out on the front page making music. Nice, pretty pictures. They're also drinking beer. It's good German music, right? Okay. Next slide, please, if you don't mind. And here, if you look at the top of the page up here, sure enough, this is the very strange piece of music that Farina is referring to on his title page with the various strange inventions, the likes of which have never before been seen in print. The piece is called, in Italian, the Capriccio Stravagante. Now, capriccio is one of those strange words. So in English, we have an equivalent to that word. What is the equivalent of capriccio? It's caprice. And caprice means whimsy, fancy, right? So wandering, kind of whatever comes into your mind, that's what's going to come into this music. That's what, in a way, what he's saying here. There is another association with the Italian word capriccio, or a few other associations, but one of them is that there is a game going on of role play, right? There's actually going to be some drama here, some action, and sure enough, I think the next slide is just I'm gonna play you a little bit. In one moment, don't click it yet because it will start playing music. This is the introduction to the Capriccio Stravagante. Sounds like regular old music. And indeed, if you kind of count the minutes, most of the piece, the whole piece could last around 18 or 20 minutes. It's a pretty large piece of music. Don't worry, I'm not going to play the whole thing for you. That would take up a lot of time. I wouldn't have to talk that much, but I'm not going to do that. So the whole piece is 18 minutes long. If you were to count the minutes, most of it would sound like normal music, right? And I'll play it for you in a minute. You'll hear what it sounds like. And I think you'll understand what I mean. But then you get to these weird, what I'm calling representational sections, where the violin and its relatives, so the violin, viola, there's a tenor violin in the Renaissance, which there is not anymore, we don't have that. And then there's some kind of bass violin, also could be a cello, could be something a little larger. But anyway, the violin and its relatives, the violin family, use weird tricks, virtuosic techniques, strange techniques. They hold the violin in weird ways. They hold the bow in weird ways. They actually, at one point, they actually put the violin on their hip to imitate a guitar, and they pluck like a guitar. And they use the bow to play multiple notes at once. Right? So that's a hard thing to do on the violin. Usually the violin only plays one note at once. So we get to these weird representational sections kind of thrown into this otherwise normal music. So let's hear some of the normal music. This is the beginning of the piece. Oh, no, darn it, I timed that wrong. You see, I got my slides. Okay, actually, let's skip ahead 2, and then we'll come back.
2?
Yeah. That's just a little bit of the opening. I think you can hear what I mean, that you can kind of count along to this music. You could sing along to the music if you knew what was coming, right? It has a melody. It has a very fixed way of moving through time. Everybody get that? Nods? No? Yes? No? Okay, all right, a few nods, that's good. And again, then we get to these weird sections thrown in the middle. So, Don, can I ask you to go backwards? This is, yeah, sorry for the confusion. If we go backwards 2 slides. So then we get to these weird sections. This is not one of the weird sections that I'm going to show you, it's something else. Where there are, again, all of these virtuosic techniques that the violinists have to know how to execute. They have to know what to do. So, since the violin is really just coming into its own in 1627, it's really just becoming an instrument that a lot of people are playing, Farina actually takes the trouble to explain these things in print. He actually writes out these performance instructions at the end of the volume. And they are, some of them are quite funny, strange. So he writes them first in Italian, and then, if you could go ahead one more slide just to show the nice picture, he actually writes even more in German, and then from here on down there's actually a glossary of terms from German into Italian. Why? Well, he is an Italian musician bringing Italian novelty, right, Italian musical innovation to Germany, and his patron, the Elector of Saxony, the guy who's paying his bills, actually wants to understand what's going on. So he's in a way, the patron, this nobleman, is paying for Farina to import the latest musical styles into Germany. Okay, and so then, and if you look at, I've translated the performance instructions for you, more or less. I've kind of condensed the Italian and the German, it's okay. So, for example, about the peasant's lyre, the English word for this is hurdy-gurdy. It's a very strange Renaissance instrument that does not much used anymore, but it's a very weird instrument that involves kind of cranking